to get us started. What struck me when I first came to Candombe and started studying things was the really limited color palette in a lot of ways. I'd actually found my way there again through Brazil, so when I think about the batucadas and things like that, I think of all of those color instruments, you know, from small tambores to the different shakers and things like that. Candombe really is limited to these 3 drums. Up until the 60s, there was actually a 4th drum, but over time the drums kept getting larger, and the largest drum, the bombo, actually disappeared, and this large drum here, known as the piano, actually took over. It's interesting, there's a lot of sort of generic things about Candombe. The drums generally are called tambores, which is just Spanish for drums. So to really talk specifically, you have to go into each individual instrument. And again, there are 3, chico, piano, or pique. You can see some decorated drums that you'd see in carnival parades on the screen. Very similar to conga drums, and usually if I'm carrying the 2 smaller drums, people won't notice much, but as soon as the piano comes out of the car and I'm walking down the street, I'll get a million questions, because it's like a conga, just ate too much. And it's funny I say that because in Uruguay, they actually refer to these drums as panzones, which means pot-bellied. And that's really what sort of sets them apart from some of the other Afro-Cuban instruments and things like that. But otherwise, the construction's pretty much the same. They were taking materials that they were finding around the docks, the different barrels, and just converting those to newer instruments in their new setting. All tambores are played with a bare hand and a single stick. And there's one rhythm and one sort of sound that is common to all 3 drums, and that's the madeira. Madeira means wood, and refers to the act of striking the drum shell, the wooden shell, with a wooden stick. But it also refers, if you do madeira, you're playing this guide rhythm, or a clave rhythm, and you know, you can see, those of you who read the notation things, a 3-2 son clave. And it's interesting because this rhythm was probably introduced to Candombe in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, when the Afro-Cuban ensembles, the dance bands and things were touring throughout the Americas, and they think that's actually probably when these rhythms sort of found their way into Candombe. The basic pattern of madeira is generally used just to start a performance. So one player will play the basic pattern, and then everyone will pick that up. Usually once the basic pattern begins, tons of variations start happening. So when you have multiple players playing, I included a very common variation here. But just so you can kind of hear that on the chico. So really pretty basic. The only other real thing that happens with the madeira pattern is repique players especially will pick this up once a performance is starting to regulate tempo, maybe speed up, slow down, and it's pretty common in Candombe for phasing to want to happen, and you'll understand why here in a second. So a repique player, or even piano players sometimes, will drop and play that rhythm to just get everyone locked back into the main groove. The chico, probably the most appropriately named drum because it's the más chico, the smallest instrument. I threw the little picture of the kid because it was just cute, and he's chico. So the chico is generally the first drum you would learn to play in Candombe, which is kind of crazy, and again, I think you'll understand why in a second. It's not crazy, but it tends to be the most difficult instrument to play, and it's known as the metronome of the ensemble. So immediately as I say that, those of you looking at the notation are probably already seeing what's going to be problematic here is the strongest beat, which is the stroke of the hand, is happening immediately after the basic pulse. So if we're counting that 1, 2, 3, 4, the chico players are going to come in and sort of establish the tempo just off of that primary beat. And that stroke of the hand can either be, depending on the situation, a tone, and that would be something if you're playing in smaller settings, or in the jamada context, usually a slap. So if you have try in this setting, and it's going to be fun because most people are percussionists, right? Can we clap that basic Madeira pattern? So, keep it going. I need for you to hang on to this. The immediate thing, and it took me months in Uruguay, especially in these parading events where multiple groups would be coming one after the other, to not think 1 EN, 2 EN, 3 EN. For a long time, I had to kind of learn mental tricks at times to adjust and catch this beat. So there are generally 2 patterns, and that's pretty much it for the Chico. There's the liso pattern, which is funny, it means smooth, and that's the one that you would play in faster settings. The repicado, which refers to a ringing sort of sound, is usually played when there is less activity from a repique. So it fills in the space that a repique might normally fill in. In the llamadas, that's a rare pattern to see played except by one specific style. And we'll get into that. It's usually something you hear more in Candombe songs where the drums are playing over, guitars and pianos, things like that. So balancing that basic rhythm of the Chico is the piano. And this is where you get sort of your structural foundation rhythmically. Hang on there. It's too early to pick these up, I think. So the piano is usually the drum I get the most questions about. Again, one, the name itself ends up bringing questions. And Candombe's history is related to the tango, especially early on. And the best answer for why they call this drum the piano that I was able to find relates to its function in some of the early tango orchestras, where it played the bass pattern that the piano, the keyboard piano, would have played. Make sense? That seemed like a great answer to me, so I ran with it. Piano really became the focus of my project, and it's what I'll play most in here today, because it most defines identity in Uruguay and the different groups and things. And these are 2 basic patterns that we'll come back to in a moment. The stroke, the lower line in the notation, that sort of characterizes the piano is called masa, which basically refers to a kneading sort of sound. And it's a heavy stroke of the hand that just presses into the drum. And that's the sound that defines the piano. And as you can see, that stroke takes place on really the strong sort of pulse. So again, counterbalancing that Chico rhythm. That's kind of what you might hear piano-wise. I thought we would try, and this is kind of new, getting you guys to vocalize the Chico rhythm so you can hear the piano against that vocalization. The easy way to kind of get the Chico going is think palaka, palaka. Give yourself a little on the first beat. Palaka, palaka, palaka. And I'm going to need to hear you, right? So. So good. That makes the Chico rhythm feel a whole lot better, right? Yeah, perfect. Again, I come back to the piano a lot because it's really the main focus of the presentation. And like I say, hopefully there'll be time at the end for questions if anybody has any. There's finally the repique. And like the repicado pattern of the Chico, repique just really refers to a ringing drum. It plays the most strokes. It's also the drum it's the least established rhythm, so it's an improvising instrument more than anything. The rhythm that I've included here is sort of a standard formula that you can build on by taking things away. The introduction is like a basic call that a lot of players will use in some way to introduce a repicado, or a ringing, playing sort of line. Again, the characteristic stroke of the Chico is the hand. On almost every drum, the hand is the important stroke. And it will feel strange if you're listening to Candombe, and this happens in Miami a lot where I live and play with some Uruguayans. They're really heavy with the stick. And it feels very, very strange to hear it sort of backwards that way. These are generally slaps. And again, a repique player will quite often play the madera and alternate with another repique player or maybe a piano player to introduce its sort of solo lines. And just to give you kind of an idea of how a repique solo will work, I'll kind of play around with this basic line you see here. Make sense? Perfect. I guess, thank you. That didn't sound very confident.